Well done, you all. We got here. Last talk of the day. I actually have been waiting all day to share a piece of news with you. Very interesting. Happened to me last week. No word of a lie. My mum asked me to join her professional network on LinkedIn. And this is surprising for a couple of reasons. The first is she is a retired music teacher, and I am a designer. So I'm not sure the Venn diagram of our careers is really going to offer her that much value. But also, she's retired. So why now, Mum? I've been a connection with your husband for 10 years, and you choose now. So anyway, it got me thinking about what she's done for her entire career, 40 years, spent in primary schools, and on a Saturday morning teaching people how to play the violin and the cello and the piano, with me sitting in the living room next door with their families while we all hung out. Each child would traipse in and out while Mum and Dad would sit there reading the papers. And I would build up a relationship over years with these families and see them grow and see the kids go through their grade 1, 2, 3, 4, as I went through my grade 1, 2, 3, 4. But in school, she would take these 30-odd kids who just wanted to pick their nose and run around and turn them into a group that could win awards. One of the crowning achievements of her entire career, or her recent career during my time, was winning a steel band competition with a class in school who she had built from scratch. She persuaded the school, with no budget for music, to buy steel pans, and then she had put this band together. They'd all been clanging and hitting things, and they won this competition. When I asked her to send me a picture of her with that group winning the steel band competition, she sent me this, which isn't that useful because, as you can see, she's there. It's not exactly a glorious photo. So instead, I used the power of the internet to recreate what I think it probably looked like.
My name is Hugh.
I'm Sarah. I'm Emma.
And I'm Jo to you.
Hello, my name is Spencer. And mine is Lorraine.
I'm Anthony.
I'm Debbie. And my name is Alban.
So I've watched that video way too many times. And there is actually a 2.5-minute version, which I thought about subjecting you to. They ride bikes, they climb trees, they're having a great time. And I do often wonder what Katrina, Hugh, Sarah, Emma, Jo, Spencer, Lorraine, Anthony, Debbie, and Abby are doing right now. You know, it's probably been 20 years, 30 years since that video was recorded. But what I love about it, and what I also think my mum probably did in her class, which I was never in, was they all have their own personalities. They're all wearing different coloured t-shirts and different coloured fantastic jogging bottoms, but they come together and they're in lockstep. They're doing the same thing. My mum was a manager. She was managing 5 to 11-year-olds in getting to some shared goal, even though all they wanted to do was run around and not be doing that. So I watched various students of my mum grow up and start with the bashing and the tooting, and this is fun when you're 4, to learning the piano, going through grades, and then some of them would turn out to have a career in music. Pretty special. Anyway, so I asked my mum, why did you invite me on LinkedIn? And it turns out she wanted to know what I do. Fair question. I mean, first of all, I should call my mum more. That's what that told me. But also, I realized that actually going on my LinkedIn even doesn't really offer the full truth of the matter, because my LinkedIn just has a list of job titles. And in fact, Susanna was talking about your shadow career before, and I kind of feel like this is kind of a shadow career as well. You can read through all the things that I've done, and I have had a strange and wiggly, twisty-turny journey on my career. But actually, none of those things tells the real story of what I've enjoyed, what I've hated, the people that I've worked with, the roles that I've fitted into. You know, being a product designer in a company with several others, you're all doing different things. You all have different strengths. Product designer doesn't cover it. Design manager doesn't cover what I was doing there. So case in point, in 2017, I was sitting, looking at my calendar on a Sunday night, thinking about what was going to happen the next week. And my calendar looked a bit like this, covered in blue. There's really no space for any me time in there. I was a design manager, and this was one of those moments where I realized I'd been there for 2.5 years doing this job. And when I joined, I'd kind of joined thinking, okay, this is a good title, good company to work for, really like the team. But at no point had I thought, what does it mean, actually, to be a manager? So it turned out it meant a lot of meetings. I'd gone into that thought process thinking about the extrinsic value of what I was doing, but not really thought too much about whether it would actually add value to me. To put it into context, when I graduated, I started a magazine with a few friends, and it was raucous. We shipped a lot of magazines. We made absolutely zero money. We threw a lot of parties, and it was one of the most fun periods of my life. So now I've got to this point, and I'm in a fork in the road, and I've chosen some of the things that ultimately aren't as important to me in favor over something that I knew I really wanted to do a bit more. So I did it anyway, and no regrets. You know, it was a good job. Really enjoyed the team. Really enjoyed working in pretty much everywhere I've worked, but wondered if I'd missed the trick. And I think that's fairly common. I think a lot of us follow these, whether they're titles or salaries, a nice logo to have on your LinkedIn profile for sure. But really, I wonder whether there's an issue here that we're disguising with this, which is that we're not really being offered a great alternative where we currently are. There's this allure of, and frankly, if you're working with a recruiter, someone who's deeply incentivized to move you on, but there's no one who's doing a great job of keeping you where you are. And this, I have stats, don't worry. This is borne out in the data, so 82% of workers are open to new job opportunities. So that's, 300 or 400 odd people here. Kind of scary. 27% of employees list lack of career opportunities as the reason they would leave in the next year. So this is a thing that if people are running teams in this room, they should be thinking about. And if you're in a team yourself, you should be thinking about as well. If anyone's playing conference bingo, this is a good moment to get Maslow's hierarchy of needs in. I don't think anyone's got that yet, so it's good that we've got one here. If you're not familiar with this pyramid of conference joy, it basically describes what you need to be satisfied, and you have to complete each layer before you can move up one. So at the very bottom, in any company, I want to feel like I can meet my basic needs, and that broadly is get paid, the job's still there tomorrow, all that kind of stuff. Security, I can feel safe at work. And belonging, I feel accepted by my peers, by my manager, that kind of thing. If you're not doing those, probably have a look at those. And actually other people today have talked about those three to a greater or lesser extent. The ones that I'm interested in are esteem, which is level 4. I feel respected and recognized. And then self-actualization, which is a fancy way of saying, I feel like I'm pushing myself and I'm growing and something's moving forward. I'm not just treading water. So titles and salaries kind of fit into level 4, I think, fairly snugly. But then challenges and goals fits into 5. And I think, as an industry, we're not doing a good enough job at tackling 5. And 5 is where the joy is. So, how do people generally try and solve this? And if you, I would be really interested to know how many people recognize these kind of spreadsheets. Broadly, it has all the levels of seniority along the top, and then all the skills and competencies down the side. I'll do a straw poll. How many of those, does anyone recognize that either as something that you have built yourself? Put your hands up. Okay, a few. That your team has and you're told to look at? Yeah, a few more. Okay. So everyone else, You don't have anything at all, and we'll get on to you later. You're in trouble too, don't worry. So these aren't much fun, frankly. Looking at a spreadsheet, no one wants to be looking at a spreadsheet. They do, and sometimes they're made to. Spreadsheets are great for blurting out everything that you can ever imagine on a page. It's limitless. You can go in any direction forever, and it's free. That's not necessarily you thinking about the end user, is it? That's you thinking about you being able to just dump everything in. So these progression frameworks aren't necessarily always very good. Actually, at Deliveroo, we got to a point where we decided we needed a progression framework, and the first version that we built has since been iterated on and improved on, but the first version that we built, we took months over it. It was a beautiful spreadsheet. It had like color coding and all this stuff going on, went on forever. Anything that we could think of, put in it, rolled it out after a few months, and the reception was not great. People were excited about it at first, but then after 2 or 3 months, no one could even find the link to the Google sheet, which is a worry when it's meant to be kind of a core piece of your infrastructure. So, because I'm a complete masochist, when I then left Deliveroo to start something on my own, I thought, you know what I love? Those spreadsheets, like the one that we made. So I've dedicated the last 18 months of my life to reading all of the spreadsheets so you don't have to. I thank you. If you go to this website, which is free, and it's all the open source ones, which is a tiny fraction of the real number that exists out there. Most of them are hidden away in company Google Drives. I know, you're nodding along. We definitely have someone who's made a spreadsheet here tonight. You can go to those. And by the way, I'm going to, for this last few minutes of the talk, I'm going to go through a bunch of examples of how to do this. And I'm going to put links to a bunch of these up so you can just grab those. None of them are spreadsheets, because I've tried to avoid spreadsheets, see if I can, even though they're everywhere. Okay, so the first thing to know, if you are wanting to build a framework, or you're wanting to improve your existing framework, is they are not all the same. And a lot of people will grab something off progression.fyi or off a blog post and just copy-paste it into their own drive. That is a bad thing to do, because you should be thinking about a few things. Actually, there's much more complexity and nuance to this, but because I have 7 minutes left, we're going to get pretty reductive here. If you want to know about all of the other things that happen, then feel free to ask later. Things like how old your company is and how resistant it is to change, how forward-thinking your HR department is if you're a big company, how quickly you hire and turn over staff, whether you're growing fast, and also whether you're a startup or more of an agency model, and these things do change stuff. But for the purpose of this, we're going to keep it broad, and I'm going to assume you're all in a startup because that makes it easier. So, 3 different levels. First level is, we have nothing, and there's a bunch of you here, or you're just too scared to put your hands up. But I'm going to assume there's a lot of people who have nothing. There's no spreadsheet, there's nothing to describe how I get from junior to mid to senior to lead to VP, or whatever the thing is at the end. There's nothing to help me understand how to grow at work, to give me that alternative to leaving and getting a job somewhere else. So if you're in that position, you just need to get something out. If you're running that team and you have nothing at all, you need to get something out. Generally, everyone in your team, these may not all be true, remember, reductive. Generally, everyone is a generalist. There's not lots of people doing very different roles, and no one has been hired into a specific subset of role. You manage everyone directly, so there's no layers of management between you and the team. Also is probably likely true. Nothing's written down yet at all, as we've covered. HR doesn't care or doesn't exist. They're the 2 options you have there. And you don't need managers, i.e., there's no option for someone in the team to go into management yet, because you kind of, as previously mentioned, you manage everyone directly, and that's kind of fine for now. So you're talking about a smallish team here. If you're in that world, there are a few frameworks here that I would recommend you look at, Basecamp and BuzzFeed, and they are just documents, effectively. All it is, it's on GitHub, you can fork it, but please do read it before you roll it out, as I said. There is some good stuff here. And they run off some of the principles that I just mentioned. So when you're building that framework, write only the things that are really important to the team. If you can't turn around and say, yes, you didn't progress because you didn't do this, or you did progress because you did, if it's not fundamental, leave it out for now. You can add that in later. Do it as a team. Involve the team in that process. Don't go off into a corner and kind of go into God mode and write the whole thing yourself and never show anyone. That always ends very badly. And also, as I mentioned before, things like, I don't know, if you're a design team and you fancy, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have illustration? And wouldn't it be nice to have, et cetera, AI? If you don't need that in the team, you probably shouldn't add it. So keep it really slim. Okay, level 2, moving fast. My managers need help and people want options. So this is when you've kind of got that first version, you've passed level 1, and now you want something a little bit bigger, a bit more robust. Some of these things are probably happening. You have specialists, so you might have hired someone into design ops, for example, or you might have people working on teams that require a knowledge of AI, as Graham mentioned. All of that stuff might be really important. You also might have a team of managers, and some of those may have done this before. So it's probably worth having a look at your first version to see if you can improve it. And you do already have something up and running. It may not be great, and it may be really short, but that's fine. You've got something for people to react to. HR does start to sniff around at this point as well. So they may say something like, we need to align your levels with our compensation bands. That's a common phrase. But all sorts of other things. Or we need you to make sure it integrates with how we do performance management. It's a lovely sentence as well, you might hear. And management is a fully fledged track at that point. So people might be able to become a manager and be promoted into management. So they're the kind of things, if you're level 2, I don't know if anyone relates to the kind of that stage of things. This is a good opportunity to have another look at your framework. So Kevin Goldsmith, who was VP of engineering at Spotify for a very long time, I spoke to him. He has a fantastic story about how long it took to roll out engineering levels at Spotify. It took them a year. And that's because, well, partly in Sweden, there's a lot of consensus. You need to ask everyone a lot, which slows things down. But also, they had nothing yet, and they were moving to something with hundreds of engineers. And these things take quite a lot of time. But that's an interesting one to look at if you want to. There's other ones, for example, Financial Times have something really interesting. That's quite new. They're building an API for it, which is pretty wild. Medium have this thing, Snowflake, where you can click around and see how you can get to the same level in different ways. It's kind of fun, and there's some Game of Thrones references in there. So they're things to look at as well. Okay, so involve your managers at this stage. Define processes and build tools, and allow for optionality. So this is your specialists. If you have different specialists, they're not all going to be measured on the same thing. So you need to allow them to grow in different ways at this point. Don't do this before you have to. It makes everything much more complicated. Okay, so finally, alignment and integration. This is where really you're doing this on a company level at this point, and the company is quite large, and there needs to be a certain amount of things wrapped around it. So first of all, engineering sniffs around, and they say, I like that, I want a bit of that. Can we smush them together? That is something that will take a while and involve a lot of conversations and workshops and things like that, so that is a thing. Or HR wants to run it effectively, take over entirely, and will give you say over a part of it, maybe the special skills that you care about, which is also fine. And hiring, performance, and compensation definitely need to be integrated at that point because everything is joined together. There's probably some big like Okta SSO thing happening as well. So you need to think deeply about how you integrate with all of those things. So this is the final, biggest, scariest, takes ages, but worth it. So some of the ones, it's actually quite hard to find those out in the wild, but some of the frameworks that have been kind of publicized and sit across multiple teams, things like Monzo, and there's a Dutch company called Blendle that have done it. It's all on Notion. It's quite pretty. So definitely worth looking at those too. So be patient if you're at that stage. If you want to take that on, it may take a while. And also don't see the people team who will be involved as the enemy because they have good intentions. They just think about these things in a different way. Okay, so we are whipping through this. First of all, be deliberate about your team's growth. If you are leading a team in this room and you don't have anything to describe how people get from one level to another, they will look for that next level outside your company. So if you're not doing anything at all, start with something, and it doesn't have to be big, but start with something, because you're saying to them then, I do care about getting you further. Second, don't put in more stuff than you have to. We had a customer we've now built an app to help teams with this. We had one of our earliest customers, they had a small team and they added 56 different skills for each team member. And I don't know if you would ever want to look at measure yourself on 56 different skills as part of your job. But the measuring probably takes longer than the job at that point. So don't add more than you absolutely have to. And finally, this is a product, not a project. You need to make sure that you're looking at it every few months. When new people join and they have ideas, make sure that they're brought into the tent, and be comfortable with the fact that it will break like all other process, and you'll have to build on it and invest more time in it over time. Okay, so all that said, another thing you can do, and this is actually the thing that I wanted to say happened last week, because it happened last week, is Progression, which is the app that we're now building and rolling out. We now allow you to make your framework public on there. And we had our first 2 public frameworks roll out this week. So if you want to go to ClearLeft or Intercom's Progression framework on Progression, then you can now do that. And that means you can browse through all the expectations, those internal expectations of those roles. You can have a look at them in an interface that doesn't look like a spreadsheet. You can see which positions they're hiring into, and you can kind of get a sense of what the team expects. So this is the end goal, that everyone gets to see what is expected of them in every role. So that's it, really. That was a real rush, and I'm 3 minutes over. So thank you very much, and questions and then a beer. Thank you.